And it took me a while to realize that I also made myself invisible. Mom came first. When I showered, when I ate, when I worked, when I did anything, mom came first. I was just as guilty as the outside world of making myself invisible. And then here I am, mom is gone. I don't know how to make me a priority.
What if you were a caregiver for years before you even knew that word applied to you? For today's guest, that realization came after losing everything, and it changed the course of her life.
Welcome to From Leads to Leases, a CCR growth podcast that helps senior living providers transform their complex challenges into opportunities. Listen in for stories from industry leaders, innovative strategies, and insights. And with our expertise, learn how to increase occupancy faster, guaranteed.
Welcome back to another episode of From Leads to Leases, the podcast that dives deep into the senior living and senior care industries, bringing you insights, strategies, and stories from the experts at the forefront of innovation, leadership, and care. I'm your host, Jerry Vinci, CEO of CCR Growth, a full-service marketing and growth agency that's exclusive to the senior living industry. And through this podcast, I'm here to guide you through the evolving landscape of senior care, exploring the innovations, strategies, and leadership insights that are shaping the future of the industry. So whether you're a provider, a caregiver, or industry leader, this show is here to help you make informed decisions and create meaningful impact. All right, today's guest is Christina Keys, a nationally recognized family caregiving advocate, speaker, and business strategist who turned personal crisis into powerful purpose. After her mother suffered a devastating stroke, Christina spent a decade as a full-time caregiver, losing her career, her savings, and nearly her life in the process. Today, she's the founder of Keys for Caregiving and a leading voice on the front lines of caregiver recovery, systems change, and support for the often invisible individuals driving care decisions across the country. So, Christina, welcome to the show. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here today. Thank you.
This is such an important topic. And like you said, I mean, invisible individuals, I think, is such a powerful way to describe caregiving. Sometimes I think they're definitely the unseen heroes across America right now. So I'm really glad you're here to share with us your insights and help some people who might be in a similar situation to you and looking for some ways out.
Yeah.
And so thank you. I want to talk first about the caregiver you didn't know you were. You didn't call yourself a caregiver until you spent years in the role. Why do so many caregivers not realize they're caregivers until years in?
Well, I think a lot of times we're thrown into it. And even if we get that diagnosis that, hey, your mom or your loved one is got dementia and it's going to progress, we're still like, we think we have time, right? And for me, everything was fine that morning. That morning I talked to my mom. We were talking about, her going out with her friends, my car, whatever. And then by 3:00 that afternoon, I got a call saying she had a massive stroke. And I walked into the ICU and I didn't know if I was going to walk out with a mother or having to make funeral arrangements. When you walk in and see that, when everything changes in an instant, for you, you're like, I just want this person to be alive,
Yeah.
So for me, I was doing all of this stuff. I brought her home after about 5 months, and there I was being a PT and OT, a nurse, an EMT, case manager, a med manager, all of these things, and didn't even realize I was a caregiver, right? I had no idea I was a caregiver because I was in tech, all my life. I didn't know that about the caregiving world. And so for me, it took a while for me to understand I was a caregiver. And I think for myself and a lot of other people, once we admit we're a caregiver, that grief really sets in that, yes, I'm still a daughter for my mother, but we understand the relationship has changed, and I think it's hard for people to, especially like a parent with a child, a husband with a wife with a husband, if we use that term for a minute, we think it's going to take away from that relationship. So it's hard for us to actually say that sometimes.
Why do you think it's hard to self-identify as a caregiver, though? I mean, is it a loss of your sense of self, or is it something along the lines of you grieving for that relationship of what it used to be and now it's kind of shifted?
I hadn't been in that industry, so I didn't even know the term. Honestly, when I remember some of my Facebook memories came up, and here I was taking care of my mom, managing her care, doing all of this stuff. And one of my first Facebook posts was, "Hey, does anybody know if they have babysitters, but like for adults?" I literally didn't even know the term caregiver. I was talking about hardware and software. You know what I mean? You asked me how to build, a data center, I'm good. You asked me what a is, I have no idea, right? And so
Right.
I didn't know that term. And caregiver, I'm thinking of somebody in the hospital, or I'm thinking of somebody who is paid. I'm not understanding what a caregiver is. It took me a long time to realize that I was a caregiver. And it was from other people talking about being a caregiver, and hearing some of those similar situations when they're caring for a loved one, that I realized, oh, I'm a caregiver. And there are some people that never really want to admit that they're a caregiver, and they use different terms like care partner, which, like, for Terry, my ex-boyfriend who I cared for, that was pretty much what I was for him, right? But the luxury of finally realizing you're a caregiver is, where to go to find resources now. You know what to search on Google. You know, who to talk to about saying, hey, I need some caregiver resources, or I need some caregiver support. It's just, when you're going to a medical center, you might be seeing the endocrinologist, right? But you have to go to the medical center first. You got to walk through those doors, right? So there's a luxury in finally identifying as that caregiver. But yeah, I remember the hardest part for me was, I remember when I was leaving my career, I gave like a month's notice because I didn't want to leave, but I was working 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, B2B, and that is just not conducive to full-time care. And by February, I'd used all my vacation time and all my sick days that I got awarded in January. And I remember that last day, I was supposed to leave at 5. Everybody left at 5. And at 6 o'clock, I'm the only one in the building. I'm still like, putting stuff into Salesforce. It was suddenly super important that everybody knew Larry wore green socks in Salesforce, right? And he's
Yeah.
like CEO and the management team. They're like, Christina, what the hell are you doing here? And I'm like, well, I just want to make sure everything's wrapped up. And they're like, it's okay to go, And I remember that was like the longest elevator ride of my life, because I got into that elevator and I was still Christina the career woman, and once those doors opened, like, I was just Christina the caregiver, and I was completely lost, and I was scared. It was scary. It was scary to know, like, when I went to work, things were so simple. You know what I mean? I was managing multi-million-dollar accounts. That was simple. Managing a constant crisis, and watching my mother, go through that. It's different when it's not somebody you love. So yeah, it's tough for us to admit that sometimes. We don't, because we don't know what we're doing necessarily, and it changes our role. So it makes us very aware that we don't have the same exact type of relationship we used to have with that person.
Could see that for sure. I see a lot of similarities too on the senior living side of things, just in terms of people not knowing the terminology until they're actually in it. Most people, when they do a search for senior living, they still put in nursing home. And
Absolutely.
that's such an outdated term.
Right. Yeah. They're like, I don't want to send my mom to a nursing home. And they think it's something. I mean, senior living is so different than what a nursing home is. I mean,
Exactly.
I would love to go to senior living now. I mean, these places are beautiful. They have gardening, movie theaters, restaurants, all of this stuff. Like, we don't know until we know.
How do financial sacrifices for caregiving show up in people's lives long after the journey ends?
Well, I don't think people understand that. For me, my mother was a aerospace engineer. She was an executive at Boeing. She retired from Boeing. She had great insurance. She had a great pension. I was in tech. I was making six figures. I'm wheeling her out of the hospital thinking, we're great. She's got great insurance. She's got a supplement on top of that. We're great. And then come to find out, her insurance does not cover in-home care. And then you don't understand that there's other things that you need on top of that, adult briefs, all the extra medication copays, all the cleaning supplies, all the, gloves, all the bed sheet, all the hospital beds, all the equipment. And you get them home and, you find out Medicare only covers one piece of equipment every 5 years. And even if you're on Medicaid, it takes like an act of God to get something finally approved. And so we both had very, good, robust 401ks. And, between everything that the hospital wasn't paying, not the hospital, but her insurance wasn't paying for. And we had to remodel the bathroom so she could actually go to the bathroom, get her wheelchair in, and make sure the downstairs was suitable for her hospital bed, all of these things, build a ramp, all of these things you don't think about. Within a year and a half, almost close to 2 years, that's all it took for us to go through our life savings. And I was in my early 40s then. I had done everything. I chased that American dream. I got a job. I turned it into a career. I put my money in my 401k, and it all went to my mother's care. And then I was paying between $3,000 and $1,500 a month for my mother's care. And when I had to leave my six-figure job, I'm taking part-time jobs and piecing them together, making $15 an hour, which I hadn't made since I was like 16 years old, up in food bank lines and having to get, resources from the community. And I didn't know how to do that either. Right. And so all of these things went away. All of my cushions went away, the vacations and everything went away. And then after my mom passed, even like on hospice, I thought, okay, finally hospice is going to come in. I'm going to get some relief. Well, hospice was a little different. Right. And so my expenses went from $3,000 to $6,000 a month. And then my mom had her stroke at 62, so she didn't have life insurance, right? So, I'm having to sell, her doll collection to pay to bury her, and I don't think people understand that, when we're thrown into a lot of that, sometimes we're not prepared for any of it, right? And so, and I don't think people understand until they go through it too, that death is very expensive, and then on top of that, you're trying to rebuild your life because it's not just about the grief, it's about the caregiver recovery also. And you're trying to rebuild your life and you are you're going through grief. You're also going through an identity crisis, right? And you're also going through, for 24 hours a day, I've been on call, and trying to calm down your nervous system. And then you've got to learn to plan financially and you're having to reach out to like, financial planners and all of these people. And it takes a minute also to get past that crisis mindset because the second you get some money put aside, you still, shortly after, within that first year or two, you're still thinking, well, there might be an emergency. So it's tough to recover financially. It's not just about the money. It's about what we have walked through as caregivers, constantly being in fight or flight mode. It's about the cost that we didn't expect of caring. It's about the cost of death that we didn't expect. It's a cost of rebuilding our life and rebuilding our credit and everything that changed a lot of times when we are caring for someone.
I've heard that so many times about people depleting their funds, their savings, their retirement accounts. I mean, how do families cope with that? I mean, how do they pay for care if they've tapped all their resources? What's left? How did they get around that?
Well, so sometimes they're able to do like with Terry, we were able to do a Medicaid spend down, right? And I was able to get him. We were not married; we were partners for like 20 years or whatever. I was able to get him the care he needed and the insurance he needed, and that way. But it also meant, he was an electrician all of his life. He had, some money and a house, and all those things went to the state, also, right? Places that they can go, caregivers can go to places like Area Agency on Aging and see what kind of programs they have too, see what kind of programs that they qualify for. Also check with some of the local senior centers and see what type of programs they have. Even something as simple as Meals on Wheels, which is a great program, right? I mean, that's going to help you right there. Every time, after a while, you equate things to, oh, that $20 equates to 1 hour of care, right? So if I'm struggling and I'm having to sell all my stuff, which I had to do, I had to sell a lot of my nice stuff. There was constant garage sales and, you know, things like that. And so if I'm having to do that, if I can go somewhere and get a little bit of help, like Meals on Wheels, or go to a local nonprofit and get some of the like adult briefs or the, medical equipment instead of paying for the hospital bed or the other 4 pieces of equipment you need that Medicare isn't paying for. So there are certain things that you can look for. But I think one of the reasons why we spent so much money in the beginning is because, like many caregivers, our families, we were thrown into it. We were not prepared. We didn't understand. I think about if I would have had like a care coach, I think our money would have lasted a lot longer because they would have told me about the local resources. They would have told me about, check with area agency on aging. They would have told me about, the things that you can get covered, things that you need, things that you don't need, and so I didn't know those things, and I was asking the hospitals, I was asking the doctors, and that they're there to do something completely different than be your community guide, right?
I found an interesting statistic, and I want to get your opinion on it. It's from 2021 from AARP, but they said over 75% of family caregivers report out-of-pocket expenses, and 1 in 3 spend more than 20% of their income on caregiving. I'm kind of calling bullshit on that because everybody I know who is in a caregiving role, it's way more than 20%,
Yeah, I mean,
way
I think
more.
AARP is wonderful, the research they do and the statistics they do, but, that was not my experience, and that, is not the experience of I think the caregivers that I know would rejoice in it only being 20%.
Yeah,
You know what
that's
I
what
mean?
I'm
They would
saying.
be like,
Yeah.
"It's our birthday," you know? But I think it's important that they do that research, that's just not been my experience. There is a lot of expenses that we don't think about, and maybe perhaps they didn't put that into that research, like I said, the outside medical equipment you need, the, remodeling of the bathroom that you need, the ramp that you need to be built, the extra copays that you're spending because your medications are more now, the extra doctor's visit copays, the bathroom remodeled, all the stuff, right? The extra cleaning supplies, right? So the extra gas that you need because you're running around. I mean, all of those things are not, I don't think they're equated into that. I think they're looking at how much their out of pocket is. My out of pocket for care, what I was writing checks for to the private caregivers and the agencies were between 1,500 and 3,000 a month. And I wish that would have been when I was working six figures, that might have been 20%, but not after I had to leave my career.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
many caregivers do have to leave their career.
You mentioned financial planning too. What kind of tools or strategies have you found that help people now that you wish you would have known about at the time?
The care coaches would have been wonderful, right? A care
Yeah.
coach would have been wonderful, and if anybody's listening, you don't know what a care coach is, it's somebody who's been through it, right? Somebody who's been through it, who knows how to find local resources, who knows about some of the programs that are out there, who knows about some of the tools that will help you manage your care journey, and also that will be there to, listen to what you're going through and understand. Local nonprofits would have really helped. I didn't know about those. I didn't find out about you know, nonprofit here that helped with the extra medical equipment and the adult briefs until, I don't know, 4 years into my care journey, right? And, again, checking with the area agency on aging and see what kind of programs they have would have helped a lot too. All of these things I would have known, but I didn't even know what to look for. I didn't know what to look for. It's kind of like once I use that caregiver word, I started to find out what to look for. And once I started connecting with other caregivers and building community and finding support and learning some of these things to ask for is when things started to change for me.
And from the medical side, what do you think hospitals and discharge planners still get wrong about supporting families post ICU?
Well, it's not necessarily their job to give people resources. When I left that hospital, my mother was in a wonderful hospital, one of the best hospitals in Seattle, I think Harborview Hospital. And we were there for, God, like almost 3 or 4 months. I lived in the hospital with her. So I'm talking to these doctors, these nurses, these, social workers, discharge plan, like all of these people all the time, chaplains, everybody who walks in. I'm trying to be educated. They let me wheel her out of there knowing I had no training, knowing I didn't know anything other than, again, how to build a data center, and they gave me a list of senior living locations and in-home care. And I didn't, and what they had told me, it seemed like if I got in-home care, it had to be 24 hours, right? And I didn't want somebody there 24 hours. I thought that might be expensive, So there is a hospital system on the East Coast. I can't remember the name of it right now, but they have gotten it right. They have gotten it right, and it is something that I dreamed about so many times. And they actually have caregiver resource centers right in the hospital. If they have somebody who their family members had a stroke. They know that person's going home. There's a caregiver. Somebody comes in and says, hey, by the way, we have this caregiver resource center. It's a whole area in the hospital, a whole section of the hospital that has all these resources, that has people you can talk to. They've got like massage chairs, and I believe there's 14 of them, right? And then if hospitals had something like that and medical centers had something like that, doesn't even need to be a large place. Listen, I'm sure that doctors and nurses and medical teams, they have had their fill of angry caregivers, right? Angry, confused, and scared caregivers, right? The way I communicated with um, hospital teams and medical teams when I was first caregiving was way different after a while, right? I learned the difference between advocating and being scared out of my mind and trying to communicate that, right? And if they were to implement that, not only would they have people who are not having as many hospital visits, because when they're at home, they're getting the care they need. The caregivers are not as burned out. They're able to provide better care. They're able to find the resources. So they're not having repeat hospital visits. It would really help them to, have a better flow of how things go when they're dealing with families, when they're dealing with people who have, terminal issues or medical issues where they need family caregivers. So I think they need more than just a list of, senior living and, in-home care, because not everybody gets to. My mother would need to go to skilled nursing. She wouldn't have been able to live in one of the fancy senior living places, right? But that's what they gave me a list of, you know?
Yeah. That's just such a scary thought. Them just like sending you on your way, with little to no experience in doing this. I mean, that had to be terrifying. I can only
Well,
imagine.
yeah, and as a new caregiver, I didn't know either. They
Yeah.
said you can take her home and even with Terry, like, you gotta take take 'em home, and I'm not trained for that, and it took me a while to learn to say, "There is no safe place for them right now. We need to find a safe place for them," you know? And sometimes that meant them going from the hospital to the skilled nursing, right? So they could get the rehab they need, so they could be safe when they got home, right?
Yeah.
Or even just something as simple as scheduling that home health and all the home health, folks that are going to come into the house before you leave that hospital so they're safe. I didn't know. She's got to go home with you used to be okay and just figure it out. Right? We learn along the way how to advocate for our loved ones, how to advocate for ourselves so everybody's safe.
And when the caregiving ends, what does the recovery process look like?
Well, caregiving for many, many of the caregivers, it affects our life, financially, physically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, socially. And so we have to recover all those areas of our life, and we've been in fight or flight mode for so long. I was constantly going into an emergency, coming out of an emergency, preparing for an emergency, or recovering from an emergency, right? And I had a very strange blessing. My father, who I loved dearly and I was not a caregiver for, died unexpectedly about 6 months before my mother. And so I went through all the grief counseling, one-on-one grief counseling, and I learned a lot about grief. And so I thought when mom was passing that I would be all prepared for that. I didn't realize there were certain things like, when my dad passed, I didn't have to worry about, everything shooting in my system like it used to, the adrenaline going crazy in my system whenever the phone rang, right? Or when it was 5 o'clock, or when it was 2 o'clock, or when it was 10 o'clock. Because those were certain times that, I had to check in on mom or do something for mom. There are so many things like going out, the social isolation that I had lost a bunch of friends and now I have to like make a bunch of friends, right? And even my relationship with, how I saw things spiritually changed as well. So having to recover all of those things and there I was always super optimistic. I was always the fun one. I was always the funny one. Well, I wasn't like that after, mom had the stroke and being able to find out who we are again and regain some of that, right? Because we've become so full of, fear and depression and anxiety at times, depending on how our support system is. I can tell you that if we're practicing self-care, sorry, caregivers, if you're listening, I'm sorry I mentioned the bad word, self-care. But if you're practicing self-care and you have community, then it's going to be easier for us, right? Your recovery is going to be a little bit easier, but there are these different aspects of our life that we have to recover, and the financial we have to recover. I mean, all of these things. Something as simple as I remember after my mom passed and I went out on a date. I went out on this lovely date with this gentleman. He took me to this very nice restaurant, and he's having a conversation with me, and I'm having a whole different experience because all I can think is, "Oh my God, I got to ride in somebody else's car here. I didn't have to drive my own car in case I had to leave it. Oh my God, my phone's in my purse. Like I always used to have it on the table. Like, oh my God, I don't have to be home at a certain time. Like, oh my God, I'm not having to pay for care while I'm here. Like, I don't know what happened for him on that date, but for me, I was having a whole different experience. So something even as simple as that, we have to learn, and then we have to deal with, some of the things, all the grief on top of that, right? So we're processing the grief, and we're also processing how do we recover these parts of our life, and the who am I now if I'm not a caregiver? I've always and we talk about the caregivers being invisible. And I used to get so angry about that. I used to get so angry about it. And it took me a while to realize that I also made myself invisible. Mom came first. When I showered, when I ate, when I worked, when I did anything, mom came first. I was just as guilty as the outside world of making myself invisible. And then here I am, mom is gone. I don't know how to make me a priority. Like, even just sitting down to eat a meal and not project manage during that meal was uncomfortable for me. So learning how to watch TV without it just trying to block everything out, I mean, uncomfortable for me. And I started a caregiver recovery program. I have many years in recovery, 31 years in actual recovery. And when I was coming out of being a caregiver, it reminded me of when I first started my recovery from drugs and alcohol back 31 years ago. So, the caregiver recovery term came from that. And when I first started it, it's baby steps. It's baby steps for all of that. And so I started a caregiver recovery support group. And what's been so great about that is all of the people that are in that group, are experiencing the same thing. They're recovering all of these different areas of our life and being confused by, you know, the different steps along the way and who we are and what our life can be. Because all of our lives are way different than we thought they were going to be. We think we're going to help mom pass or dad pass or whoever, we're going to grieve, and then we're going to have all this freedom. And it's not like that because a lot of our life was run on adrenaline before, right? And now we're just running on being a human being, which is a little bit different level. So,
I'm sure it's different for everyone, but in your experience, what are the best ways to cope with that grief and just allowing yourself to come back to center? I mean, is it just a time thing? Is it support groups? Is it being self-aware that you're experiencing these things and recognizing where your life is impacted and how you need to work on those responses and subconscious, right? Some of it.
yeah. Well, I definitely recommend anybody, whether you have been a caregiver or not, if you lose someone very important, in your life, even if you lose a pet that was, very important in your life, to I found that grief counseling was very helpful for me. And if group grief counseling is not your jam, that's not comfortable for you, there's individual grief counseling. There's also grief Reiki, there's art therapy, there's even grief raves now. There's a million ways to do grief, right? So, whatever way you process that, it's out there for you, right? And I found that it was life changing for me. But the biggest thing I realized is just like in caregiving, because in caregiving, the reason why that first few years, and after I left my career, I went to my last doctor's appointment and they told me, like, hey, by the way, your body's shutting down. You have 6 months left to live, and I had to learn self care really quick. The first thing I had to do was redefine my normal, right? So when I'm going through this new change in my life with the grief, not being a caregiver, I have to redefine my normal, right? And so that means I have to fit in what I can do for my grief recovery, what I can do for my calming down my, nervous system, right? My cortisone levels, bringing those down. And it's not just about going to the doctors and getting a pill. It's very important to go to the doctors, right? That's one thing that we did not do a lot of times when we were caring for, you know, um, someone else. So that's something that I always encourage people to do is go to the doctor and see, how you're doing, right? And but we have to, seek out whatever works for us. If that's yoga, if that's tai chi, if that's, somatic therapy, whatever it may be, whatever works for you, because you're also like for me and what I've heard from the other people is nothing feels right at first. Nothing feels right at first. So that's okay. Just keep trying. Just keep trying until something clicks, until it feels nothing's going to be comfortable at first, right? Nothing's going to be comfortable for a while until it feels a little less uncomfortable, right? And the biggest thing with grief is and caregiver recovery, there is no graduation day, and people talk about those 5 stages of grief, right? The 5 stages of grief were written for people who were dying. They were not written for the people who were living, right? Because we can experience those 5 stages of grief in like 10 minutes, and on repeat. And we can be fine for 6 months and then something happens and that grief comes up. So the normal is there is no normal that you have to fit into. If you're not hurting yourself and you're not hurting somebody else, however, it helps you to feel better and learn to walk with that grief because if it's somebody really close to you, grief doesn't go away. You just learn to walk with it differently.
I love that. I love that. That's great advice. Thank you for sharing that. Shifting gears to look at things through the senior living lens a little bit. A lot of the marketing and focus for senior living providers is really on the older adults or the family, but not necessarily the family caregivers. So how are providers missing the mark by marketing only to older adults or to the family, but not to the caregivers?
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things I did when I changed my career was I started going out and gathering resources and talking to people. And I'd say, "Hey, in the senior industry, you work with family caregivers, right?" "Oh no, I work with just seniors." I'm like, "Well, who's signing all those contracts and who's like making the calls?" And well, it's usually family member. I'm like, okay, well, so you work with family caregivers? No, I just work with seniors. Okay, just because they're bringing the senior in, and that's who's going to get the service. But that's not necessarily who's making the decision, right? The family caregiver is making the decision. The family caregivers are not only going to make the decision on the service you provide, but they're also going to make the decision on sometimes the ease of it, and how much you understand that they are a part of it. Like for senior living, they're going to be calling, they're going to be, going and visiting. They want to work with a location that's going to be open to seeing them as part of the team, right? So I think that it's really important that they start looking at when they can, not only, the times that you're posting on social media, the different social media platforms that you're on. I would talk to people and they'd be like, "Oh, I hate TikTok or I hate Facebook or I hate this." It's like, I really don't care what you hate. Your clients like that, and that's where they're at. You're talking to isolated caregivers who aren't going out anywhere and they're on social media many of the times. And so you might not like it. You don't have to post dance videos, but you should maybe post about your business, right?
Yeah.
This is how you market to them. And another thing that, I did a lot of classes at the senior living locations. And one of the things that I did a lot of downsizing classes, before, during, and after the funeral classes, like resource fairs, all there. And then what would happen is we would work with the community and they would give tours of these beautiful places, right? So people knew and they had people who moved in after, they weren't ready then, they knew where to go afterwards, right? And I don't understand. There's always room somewhere, once a week or once a month where they could have a caregiver support group for those family members who are in that location, right? Because again, it's if a caregiver is happier and calmer and they're having support and they're having community, they're less likely to come to your staff and say, "Hey, you're doing all of this wrong because I'm frustrated with my life." Right? So, having things like, a caregiver support group that you host at your place, having community resources there, having a caregiver area there where there are resources where they can look at, just acknowledging that they're there, right? And when you are a company and you provide a service for a senior, think about some of the other services or products that might be helpful to them also that you don't have necessarily, but you could recommend to them because they're going to remember that, hey, I went to Jerry. He helped my mom get into this senior living place, but he also told me about, this caregiver support group. He also told me about this financial planner or this care coach. And, you know, I would recommend Jerry all day long because I feel like he really valued me and took care of me and helped me, not only my mother, but me. Right.
One of the things that I know just from the marketing side and looking at all the move-in data that I come across on a regular basis is that the sales cycle is way longer in senior living than people think it is. So exactly what you're saying. I mean, there was a data point from 2023. ASHA found that family members are the primary decision makers in 73% of senior living placements. So they're way more involved than people might think. And that first impression, second impression, or if you're just providing resources and maybe down the road they remember that and then they come back. I mean, that's so vital to that whole process of just building rapport, you know?
Right. And if you're in that, I mean, there's a great community here that does like events where they invite outside people and, the caregivers can come. They do lunch events or, anything like that where they're able to see that. I remember I did a downsizing event and this lady came, wonderful lady. She was just wanting to, downsize her house a little bit. Her husband was with her at the time, and she came to a couple more of my events, and they were always in the senior living locations. Well, when her husband passed and she had this house that was too big for her, guess where she went to like find a place to have to live? It was a place that she had visited like 3 years prior. In those events that they said, "Hey, you want to do a tour?" And she was thinking she would never live there, right? That's one that I just know personally because I was with her on that whole journey, right? So,
Exactly. Exactly. One of the core messages that I've heard you say before is talking about building community and not competition.
right.
Um, Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I feel like there are so many people who are worried about I have to get all these customers. I can't have my competition in there. There is enough seniors. If you like my town alone, I live in a town where there's 500,000 residents, right? There are 49,500 family caregivers. So there's obviously a lot of seniors that they're caring for, right? There is not one community, there is not one senior placement person, there is not one any type of senior service that can handle 49,000 customers right now, right? And so if you're building that community again, if I'm a senior placement person and I go to you and I talk to you about my services, but I say, hey, by the way, while we're getting this worked out, here's this information for the support group. Here's this information for Meals on Wheels. Here's this information for the downside. I'm full service, right? I become full service without having to do all that stuff myself. And families appreciate that. Families appreciate that a lot. And building that community, I remember I went to Indianapolis to build community. I was there for like 2 months, and I found in 2 months of being there, I found and produced a 43,000 square foot expo, right? And I found 154 resources in that town for seniors and caregivers. And I'm at this event, and there are a lot of people there who have marketing people who their whole job is to be in the community. Their whole job is to connect. And they're coming up to me and saying, I didn't even know these resources were in this town. Should know these resources are in this town. And from that, I built a networking group so they can continue to network. And we're at this first meeting, and one of the nonprofits that we invited was a nonprofit that built free ramps for people with mobility issues. You'd think that's a very important nonprofit. They had been around for 15 years. There was like 30 people in that first meeting. There was only 2 people who knew about that nonprofit. And there were a lot of heavy hitters that were, in that community that, were people who had, people who were paid to go out and find resources. They should have known about that resource. They should share about that resource. So, because you think about the caring closet that's here that gives away the durable medical equipment and medical supplies to people. These nonprofits don't have a huge marketing budget. They don't have people that they can pay. They're run by volunteers that it's going to all the networking meetings, right? So we have to network together to get that information out there. So we have to build community. And what happens is when I was building community all over the United States, I would go into these towns and there's these little silos of like, the small group that works together here and they refer small group over here, small group. Look, there's enough business for you guys to all work together, right? And you have to do more than just be the guy who shows up at that networking meeting and hands out your business card and, participates in community. You got to be more than just that guy. right? You got to participate in the community, and it helps build your business too. If you're there to build your business, building community is going to build your business.
And in addition to lack of collaboration, how do you think there's obviously a lack in caregivers? I mean, there's a
Yeah.
shortage in that space for sure.
Yeah.
How can tech platforms solve that problem?
Well, there's tech platforms out there that, like Go Instacare is one, right? Go Instacare is a great tech platform that has caregivers that are on it that people can hire agencies can hire professional caregivers, people can hire private caregivers. The caregivers on there can take, short-term jobs, part-term jobs. So what happens in the care industry with these agencies, sometimes these caregivers get full-time work. Sometimes they do based on how many clients they have. And then sometimes they get part-time work and it ebbs and flows. And so they lose people. These people go out and get part-time jobs and sometimes they're making more at McDonald's than they are as a CNA, right? And so platforms like Go Instacare, they're able to go in there and have jobs that are still in that field, right? So we're keeping them in that field. So they're not necessarily going out and door dashing or, eats or, driving around doing stuff. We're keeping them in that field. And that's what we want to do.
That's great. That's great. And then for families that are looking to navigate online care marketplaces, I mean, what should they be looking for?
The first thing that you want to do is you want to try to get a tool that's going to help you with your care journey, right? There are tools out there like Inner Hive, there's HeroGen, there's the Pink Book. I mean, there's all kinds of tools out there that are going to help you not only manage your time, manage your tasks, manage your documents, but they're also going to connect you with community, right? They're going to connect you with community. I would also say, go to places like Caregiver Action Network. They've got a hotline that you can call, and on that hotline, they'll give you some of the resources you need. If you have a loved one who's had a stroke, go to, look up the Stroke Foundation. If you have somebody who has cancer, look up that foundation. They have all the resources they need. Dementia, like Dementia Society of America, Alzheimer's, Association. Those folks right there are going to be your starting place, right? You have to start somewhere. And when you're talking to somebody, what I would say, if you're a caregiver or you're somebody in the industry, when you're talking to somebody, the end of your conversation should always be, do you know anybody else I should check with or you would recommend? Because if you're looking for medical equipment, that's great. You got that resource, but you've got somebody on the phone who's probably connected to another resource, right? Your last question should be, do you know anybody else that I should talk to that might help on my care journey or help me care for my mother better? Or if you're a business person, that might help me help my clients better. Because 1 + 1 + 1, you just build your community out that way. If I'm able to step into a town that I don't know anybody and within 2 months have 154 resources, it's because I asked that question continually. Do you know a few was the question I would
Yeah.
ask, right? And we can all do that. So,
Yeah. No, that's such a simple solution and a great way to network and build that out so quickly. We do that all the time at some of the networking events that we go to. I always ask that. Even with the podcast, I reach out
right.
to people all the time and ask, is there anyone else that you think would be a good fit for the show or multiple people? I would love to connect with them. So that's a great way to do it. Tell me about Keys for Caregiving. How did that come about and what it is that you're doing now?
So Keys for Caregiving, I left my tech career and I wound up having to get a job part-time in the senior and care industry. And my job was to be a sales and marketing manager and find all these resources in town. And I did a bunch of stuff, put a bunch of classes out, put together an annual senior and caregiver resource fair. And from there, I had quite a few resources, built a nonprofit, a hyper-local nonprofit that got national coverage. People started asking me to speak. I worked for a company who I was able to build community all over the United States. While I was doing that, I was doing some consulting jobs with companies who needed to be able to reach out to caregivers because they knew how to reach out to seniors, but not caregivers. I was helping people with events. One thing led to another. And, that's what I do now is the main bulk of my business is consulting with businesses who are trying to reach family caregivers, trying to create events for family caregivers. Also, I speak all over the United States, the caregiver journey during it and after it. I teach classes on caregiver recovery as well. So that's what Keys for Caregiving is. It just got to a place to where I was continually being asked to do these things and I needed the time to do that. So here we are.
That's great. That's amazing that you built that out. And where can our audience go to learn more about Keys for Caregiving or connect with you directly?
ChristinaKeys.com, right? And then also you can find me on any of the social media platforms, Keys for Caregiving. I also have a national text line that you can text me, and that's 360-230-7736.
Awesome. That's so great. Well, Christina, thank you so much for hopping on the show today. I really appreciate it. I know that everything you shared is going to be really valuable to anyone who's starting or in the midst of their caregiving journey. Thank you. Thank you so much.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you so much, Jerry.
Thank you. All right. So as we wrap up today's episode, I want to thank Christina Keys for sharing such an honest and important story from the realities of full-time caregiving to the overlooked stage of recovery and the systems that need to change. Christina, your voice is helping so many others feel seen, supported, and prepared. So thank you. If you want to connect with Christina, hire her as a speaker, or learn more about her work through Keys for Caregiving, you'll find her links in the show notes. And as always, we hope you found this episode insightful and inspiring. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform and stay tuned for more episodes where we continue to explore the evolving world of senior care, covering everything from innovative care models and leadership strategies to family support, technology, and the future of aging. Also, remember that From Leads to Leases isn't just an audio experience, we're also a video podcast. You can subscribe to our YouTube or Spotify channels if you want to see the full episodes like the one here with Christina. I'm Jerry Vinci, CEO of CCR Growth. Thank you for joining us on From Leads to Leases, and please like, subscribe, and share this episode with anyone who might find it useful. Until next time, lead with strategy and with heart. Chat with you again soon. Thanks, Christina.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to From Leads to Leases. Are you ready to fill your rooms faster and increase occupancy? Visit ccrgrowth.com to learn about our Senior Growth Innovation Suite, a proven system to generate highly qualified, tour-ready leads, accelerate sales, and reduce acquisition costs. Let's connect and turn your challenges into opportunities. See you next time.